question for you. Can you explain some of the things you think about in terms of psychology? Community.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm perfectly honest, I think psychology is a bit of a clickbait term. I mean, we use it, but psychology is a method of study of, the brain and how things work in our heads and all those kind of things. Some of the things we think about is, what is the core value that drives people to participate in communities? And also, how do we relate to other people within those communities? So if there's some theories and principles that we look at more than others, one is the self-determination theory. The idea that if you want people to stick around in a community, then you can't just give them the value that they came from. If people visit a community, they get an answer and then they leave and then they don't come back until they have another question or another problem they want solved. That might be once a day, that might be once a week, or more likely, it might be never, ever again. And that's why almost every brand community has really bad retention rates. Very few people actually participate in a community more than once or twice. And so the challenge is, how do you increase people's sense of competence? How do you increase their sense of autonomy and relatedness? And specifically, some of the things we look at here is, how do you help people know they're getting smarter? And one way of doing that is to show them good answers, related questions, related information. Another way is to guide them through a journey, where if they've answered one post, they can get other information that's related to those posts. Another way of thinking about in autonomy is trying to make them feel they can make a unique, useful contribution to the community. People that tend to participate in groups over the long term keep doing it because they keep feeling like they can make a unique, useful contribution to the group. And the moment that people don't, they stop participating. People don't want to feel that they're replaceable. They want to feel they are individuals. They want to feel their unique skills and experiences are being appreciated within the group. And very often they don't. And part of the challenge is that, how do you make sure every single person feels like they can contribute to the group? And here we look at what's called ABC or ABCD, which is called Asset-Based Community Development. And this is basically the idea that every single person can contribute to a community, even if it's your very first day in that topic, even if you haven't had any experience in that topic before. You have questions that are going to be helpful to the next person whose very first day it is in that topic. And so if you can get those questions in the community, that is a unique, useful contribution. If you have someone that has a background in finance or legal or anything like that, and there's a related question, you can tag them in to participate in that. And the challenge is very often building up the systems around that. And there's a lot of things you can do with sense of community and making people feel a part of a group. But fundamentally, I think what drives people more than anything else is, first, is there useful value within this community I can get? That's what's going to get me to join. Is there a unique, useful contribution that I can't get from search engines? I can't get from emailing a colleague or a friend. I can't get from any other information source. And then, is there a method or process in place where I can always feel like I am a unique, useful contribution within that group? And if you can get those two things right, then a community starts lifting off. And then, there's things like habits and all those kind of things you can help develop. I don't know if we lost Tom there, but there are things like habits and things like that that you can develop within a community. But fundamentally, these are the things that we look at. Tom, are you still there, or did we lose you? Okay, I think we lost the host. So if anyone has any questions, just ask them in the chat box here, and I'll try to answer them whilst we wait for Tom to return. I think this is a first. Okay, any questions, please just ask questions, or it's going to get really awkward in here real fast. Simon, yes, thank you. How to make each person feel that unique, valuable sense? Well, let me relate this back to you, Simon. So if you're asking that question for the first time, if you're asking that in a community, I would probably put your name into LinkedIn. I'd probably try to get a sense of what your background is, and maybe reach out to you and say, hey, I know your background is in X, Y, and Z, so I can figure out what unique, useful things that you can contribute to that community. Even just asking that question, I would say that is a very good question to ask. I would let you know that other people are going to find that question useful and important as well, and try and make you feel very valued in that sense. I would probably think, well, you're the first person to ask a question. Thank you for doing that. And I'm genuine with that. I genuinely think it's great you're the first person to ask that question as well. So I think even that is a really useful contribution to make. So even whatever people are doing in a community, even that, you can make them feel quite unique and valued on that behalf. So I think that is also a really useful thing to be doing. I hope that helps. Mary, yes. How do you do this at scale in a community? Doing it at scale is really difficult because in the very early days, as you know, you can do that with each person individually, one at a time, and that works extremely well. But doing it at scale is a very different challenge. So a couple of systems you look at here. One is putting notes next to member names as they join a community, as you get to know them. You can tag people in. My friend Ed Fry, who used to work at HubSpot or the inbound.org site, had a fantastic system where knowing what discussions you clicked on before, they can give you relevant questions as well. If you're using the discourse platform, for example, you can assign people to groups, and then you can mention the entire group instead of just a specific individual at a time. But generally, for most people, they're just going to read, they're not going to participate much. But once someone has made their second contribution, that's usually where this kicks in. And so you're not dealing with everyone asking their first question. Very often we narrow this range. So it's someone that asks their second question or makes a second post in the community. And that's where we jump in and try to start building out these automation systems that are in place. But even for people that are very new to a community, for example, that's a very good time to get them. If you can build a system, either run a SQL query that highlights people that have made their first contribution each week, or as you look at what Discourse and other platforms does, where there's a sign next to them where they make their first contribution in that community, then that works extremely well as well. So there's a bunch of things that you can do that. Tom, welcome back.
Wow. Okay. Sorry for that diversion. I actually changed. I'm living in a place without Wi-Fi. I changed location to a place with Wi-Fi just so this didn't happen. And all of a sudden, the place with Wi-Fi completely cut out. So I do apologize for that. I went away, but it looks like you're dealing with it fine anyway.
I just taken questions from the audience. It's fine.
I saw there's a bunch of questions already came through. Where did you get to, Rich?
Yeah, so I took one from Mary just now, and I just turned this be a bit. We're getting a few too many questions I can answer, so I might be a bit selective. Sorry, anyone that whose question I didn't answer. So I'm down to Marliz Dion. I hope I'm saying that right. In the Philippines, I think I recognize his name. Do you create a member's journey, like from onboarding the new member phase until they become advocates? No. I mean, some people do, and if you were in the debate last week, you know about the commitment curve, and me and David Spinks have different opinions on this, and other people have different opinions as well. My experience is that whilst in theory you can plot a series of actions that guide people to become a top member of the community, in practice, very few people go through those actions. People just jump around all over the place. They'll visit the community for a couple of weeks and they'll disappear, then they'll come back, they'll disappear. And some people do become more committed to a community over a period of time. Most people, even on day one, they join and they are super active from the very first day. With Geotab, for example, who I worked with here, and I think Eric is here today, they have a top member there that from the very first day was super committed and has been super committed ever since. So what we try to do is look at where someone is at today, and then how do you nudge them along the next stage of that process? It is not all connected, but it's about identifying people who are very active and getting them active at not just the right level, but doing the right things based upon the current level of engagement. We might look at people that are new to a community as well and look at how we can nudge them along the next phase of the journey. But in terms of a journey from a newcomer to an advocate, no, I think people spend a lot of time designing these and they don't work. But in terms of figuring out the right nudges at very specific stages of the journey, looking at what people are doing and then nudging them, that can work extremely well. So I would focus more upon that. That's, in my mind, the best bang for your buck.
Okay. And
Tom, I don't know if you want to just take over here or not.
Sure. So thanks. Keep the questions coming. I'll be diving into the questions here. That what you just said, Rich, is quite linked to what somebody asked beforehand, which is, you mentioned kind of that you don't really have like a, let's say, community curve, as David Spinks likes to call it. What do you think about in terms of an onboarding strategy? Is there any strategy there? Is it onboarding strategy and taking newbies and engaged users?
Yeah, so I would get people to try and make their second post in the community. I mean, I think we're confusing onboarding with the member journey a little bit here, because the onboarding is how do you get people up to speed and engaging in the community, and the whole member journey to the advocate level is the other side of this. So the first side, I'm completely on board with that. Like, if you go to a tool called smaply.com, I'll put the link in here. If you go to if you go to a tool called Smaply, this is my favorite tool. And we plan out step by step there, from the moment someone first hears about the community to when they first make their first contribution in the community. This is definitely worth mapping out in its entirety. It's also worth mapping out when you notice someone that is engaging at high level, how you get them involved in a super user program or top member program. That's worth mapping out in a tool like this as well. These kind of things are tremendously useful to do. On the onboarding stage, we're looking at two things. One is, well, three things. We're looking at how we are conveying a unique positioning and value of that community. Next week, I'm doing a webinar with Vanilla, and you can attend that. But we're looking at how we make this community completely unique relative to what else is going on. Like, it's not just enough to say you can connect with other people like you in this community. People don't care. It's not enough to say you can get answers to questions in the community, because people can ask questions on a search engine. They can, in some sectors, they can go to Reddit, they can go to Stack Overflow and other channels. They can ask on social media. So it's about really defining what makes your community completely unique and indispensable to the audience you want to reach. If you get those things in place, everything else is a lot better. So really figuring out what is that core messaging, how people are going to hear about the community, how they're going to promote that community. If you go to sparktoro.com, Rand Fishkin there from 4 Million Mods, just did a fantastic blog post on this. You'll have to get the blog post link. But if you go there, you can look at how people amplify things, what kind of emotions you're looking to target. And these kind of things are really important to get in place at the very beginning of a community. So getting that concept right, that's going to be magnetic to the people you want to reach, that's critical. And then a lot of it from the rest of it is getting out the way, making sure the onboarding process is smooth and easy, making sure you're not pulling difficulties in the SSO, any of those kind of things, making sure when people visit the community, they see a lot of activity and participation that's going on there. These kind of things are definitely really, really useful to have. And then when people ask a question, make sure that when you respond, you're encouraging them to participate again. So you're asking a clarifying question, you're asking for more information, or maybe you have an automated reminder there that will reach out to people and direct them to something else that they might find useful. But those are some very specific areas and very specific things you can do to engage people deeper within that community. Okay. So that was a long answer to a quick question.
That's a great answer. In fact, I'd love to ask a few more questions about this we just mentioned there, which is that value proposition. Like, how have you got any tips for kind of coming up with that? Obviously, any community should do, but have you got any tips if you're a little bit wishy-washy or not sure about kind of getting a better value proposition, if you like, and kind of honing yours in a little bit?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways you can do it. The single best thing you can do is research your audience. And this sounds really obvious, and everyone knows this, and no one ever does it. When we're launching any new community or working with an existing community, one of the first things we do is a survey of the audience, and then we interview the audience. And when you do a survey of the audience, and I can share my questions, or you can find them elsewhere that we've shared, when you do a survey of the audience, they always tell you they want really good, useful information. And that's good to know, but you get to see how it compares relative to the other things. And so what we look at there now, the interviews, and every interview with every member I've ever done has been so interesting. And you instantly get like 5 to 10 different ideas you can test. And there's a big difference in the whole strategy of a community. So for example, you can be the definitive place to get answers to questions, you know, comprehensive range. You can be the quickest place to get answers to questions. You can be the most empathetic place. But you've got to make sure you're not competing against your own customer support channel. You've got to be making sure you're not competing against the documentation that's on your site. You've got to figure out what is the unique role of that community, not just what you want it to be, but what members think it is. Some of the recent projects we've done with HP, Sephora, Octo, and other organizations is very much about figuring out what the unique positioning is, relative to all of the other channels that the members have. And so based upon the interviews, you can usually come up with a few things to test. And then you can test them by a tool like Optimizely. Someone can throw the link in, I'm sure. You can test different home pages and see what connects there. You can test via different events, or you can just test different messages and see what gets the most clicks, most likes, most actions, and then go with that. But really, like, I can't stress this enough. If you get the positioning right, everything else becomes a lot easier. And one of the reasons that some of our communities are nowhere near successful as what they should be is we don't get the positioning right. We end up competing against ourselves or against Google or Stack Overflow. And that's a challenge. So getting the positioning right is just so critical, and we don't spend anywhere near enough time on it. And if we did, all of our communities would be a lot better.
Before we move on to some of the questions in the comments, is there any people kind of more time thinking about their own positioning?
There's a book, I'll put the title in here. I put it in my email today. I think it's called Positioning, The Battle for Your Mind. If you look that up on the Amazon site, this is a really old classic book, but essentially you get to occupy one spot in the minds of your audience. I think we just lost Tom again. You get to occupy just one spot in the minds of your audience. And it's really about figuring out what that is. Is it speed? Is it the unique personality or identity? Is it the quality of response? Is it being a part of an exclusive group of experts? Really figuring out exactly what it is good. I mean, some communities do as well. I think Sephora do this extremely well now. I think that Atlassian do this extremely well. And once you've figured out what this is, this communication should be in everything that you send out. I mean, there should never be a doubt. If you think about this as a quadrant, like you have one axis and then another axis, try and figure out where you are, what those axes are to begin with. Is it speed? Is it quality? Then figure out how you're unique within those axes. Again, I'll go into this like next week, but that would be like such a big achievement. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. I will jump into some of the questions. Lily's got a great question. How can communities have some expertise as the participant, or whatever you might want to put in there, influencing how you deal with that dichotomy?
It's so interesting because for a long time I was saying, you have to be an expert in the topic to manage a community about the topic. And I think there's definitely a lot of advantages, especially in terms of naturally having connections and relationships in that field, knowing what people are talking about and knowing how to solve a lot of questions yourselves. What I'm seeing more and more is that people are being able to make it work without being an expert. But it's a lot of work. And the key thing is relationships. You need to have relationships with people that have the answers. And that could be the super users within the community that you can nurture and you can work with, you can give them a sense of access, or it can be with the people that you work with in the community. Going back to Geotab again, there's a lady that works there named Jen. If you look at community.geotab.com and go back a page or two, you'll notice that almost every answer within every question in that community has an answer. And that's not by accident. That's because Jen is working her ass off, making sure that all of these questions get a response, making sure that she's delivering, reaching out to customer support people who can answer these questions, designing systems that make that work. So really going deep into those kind of things is incredibly useful. Also, you should have a basic level of expertise as well. That means you should go through the same onboarding processes that your customers will be going through, as your staff go through as well. So you don't need to be an expert. You need to have a minimum level of expertise in that topic. And then you have to be just building relationships with people that have expertise and trying to sell why it's important to them to engage in the community. And a lot of that can be about the downstreaming effects. So if you solve a problem here and 50 people see it, that's 50 people that might not contact support, that might not leave for a competitor, any of those kinds of things. So being able to figure out what messaging and emotional messaging you're going to use to get your customer support staff to engage within that, that's pretty useful. Marian's going to put the link in here. I think that's a public community, yeah. Yeah. Tom, you're back.
I'm so sorry. I really don't understand.
Good day, huh?
Terrible day. Sorry, I missed the last of the response, but I think you answered it really well from what
I crushed it, dude. You missed it. I crushed that question.
Can we just, by the way, for everyone listening in, Richard has to sign up for his own event, and the question he wanted to ask him, awesome, which I think was, I mean,
was that really the question I gave myself? Oh God, that was a joke. It wasn't a very good joke. I guess it's the genes or the DNA. I'm just kidding. Sorry, I've completely forgot I said that. I think I said it as a joke, and then I meant to give you like the right answer to that question, and I forgot. Yeah, I feel rather uncomfortable about that now. Let's move on to better questions than mine.
Let's do it. Okay, there's another question from Catherine. How can admins encourage new members to add their first post? She says that she runs a health support community, invite new members to post, introduce themselves. But so actually, a few people asked in the questions here. You know, how do you how to engage people? So this would kind of follow that idea.
Yeah, I think the first thing is to realize and appreciate your community for what it is. So if you are, say, a customer support online community, you don't want people to introduce themselves to the community. You just don't. Like if your iPhone is broken, you don't want to introduce yourself to everyone else whose iPhone is broken as well. It just doesn't work that way. And a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to build a sense of community amongst people who just want to fix their damn phone or whatever that product is. And a lot of the time in these kind of communities, people are going to ask a question not based upon whether they need help or not. And if they need help, that's great. And they'll naturally ask a question. You just need to almost get out the way in those communities. In fact, the biggest challenge is to drive people there in the first place. So, you know, why are people going to visit that community? And a lot of that, if you look at the Okta community, who we also worked with, you'll find that they position the place to ask the community a question above to file a ticket in almost every part of their site. And that's quite important. So driving more people to the community, make sure they're aware of the community as a place to ask questions is really important. I think for your situation, it's slightly different because you're trying to build more of a sense of community. I'm guessing here, I can't remember quite what community you're working with. So for you, I think it's slightly different where you want people to introduce themselves to the community. Sometimes people just don't want to do it. They don't want to introduce themselves. And also, I hate to say it, but introducing yourself to a community can be a really boring thing to do. If you've ever been in a workshop and someone said, okay, let's go around and everyone can spend a minute introducing themselves. Honestly, maybe it's just me. Most people don't care. They're not going to remember everything. They're not going to read 50 responses. So tell them what questions you want them to ask. Tell them what you want them to do. Tell them what kinds of questions make sense. Tell them the kinds of questions that other people ask. And maybe you don't need to get them to ask a question. Maybe just responding to a question is good enough. One of the things I'll cover in my book, there we go. There's like the really subtle link. One of the things I'll cover in my book is precisely what methods you can do here to get people to ask a question in that community and what you should do, what the data actually says they should do to drive the maximum level of participation. And introducing yourself can work. It tends to work best in private online communities or smaller communities where people really want to get to know each other and there's that kind of feel. In larger communities, you just tell them the kinds of questions they might want to ask, tell them the kinds of things that they might want to respond to. And you can even ask like just fun questions to get started. I mean, one of the things we used to do in some professional communities was ask people, what is your biggest career mistake? And it was so funny because everyone had an amazing answer to it. And it was always like kind of things that you get into the right kind of spirit with. So there's so many of those questions that can work. Try to be a little bit cautious about general introduce yourself discussions. They can work, but long term, I'm not sure there's great value in them. And you can mix it up. You can test different questions and you can see what works best for you, but there's no single one answer for that.
Okay, good. Information about it. She said it's a cancer support community. And I think, particularly with community, which can be quite stressful, people feel safe and secure in the community, right? Do you have any tips about how safe or feel like they can trust it?
To a certain extent, I mean, trust there's a couple of parts of that. A lot of it comes down to the moderation of your community. Obviously, if they see negative posts there or posts that don't have a response, they're way less likely to participate. I think that's a universal thing. If you go to a community, there's no responses, you don't participate. So trusting that you get a response, because no one wants to feel like their post didn't matter. I mean, no one wants that experience. After that, I mean, for the very first post, knowing the rules and being clear about what the rules of the community are. But I mean, the problem with rules is that people have these big guideline documents that have got 20 things in them, you know, don't be racist or any of those kind of things. And those are very important things, but people don't read that. And the people that do read those guidelines aren't the people that will break them. It just doesn't work like that. But if you can highlight, say, 2 or 3 very specific messages that are unique and different to your community, that's what matters. One of the things I touch upon in the book again, hey, I'm getting good at this. One of the things I touch upon in the book again is that there are the unique things that are going to make your community entirely unique. Like there's rules that are standard for all communities, right? You know, no hate speech, all those kind of things, very important, but they're standard. We don't expect you to join a community about them. Then there's a great area stuff like, you know, do you allow swearing or not? You know, are you allowed to share photos? You know, those kind of things. And then there's a really important stuff, the 2 or 3 things that make your community unique in terms of its culture and identity. And these are where you can really push the boundary here in terms of what you want your community to be. So for Stack Overflow, for example, they want no opinions whatsoever. They just want one right answer to every question. And that's an entirely unique experience. If you go to Sephora, they want to know what you're wearing right now today, a completely different kind of experience and culture that they're developing that. So really figure out what the unique rules are. And it doesn't have to be like, don't do this, but what do you want? What's going to make your community completely unique? And what will people remember? Because people aren't going to remember, you know, a list of 20 rules. And there's a fantastic book, actually. I've forgotten. It's Priya Parker. I think it's The Art of Gathering. If someone can put the link in there. Fantastic book. But she's talking about how you can create these rules that make any group unique. And she's, you know, she'll host a group of parents, for example, and say the first parent that talks about their kids has to drink a shot, because that's what people tend to just default to. And when you snap people out of that and you don't let them do that, then you have these really interesting discussions that emerge. So figuring out what those really unique cultural rules are and plastering them in a very prominent place, I think that's the kind of route to go down. So figure out what is the one core message. What does trust actually mean? Is it trust that I won't be attacked? Is it trust that people are going to accept me for who I am? Really figure out what trust means and then translate it into a unique rule. I think that's going to be the challenge.
Catherine, and I've also read Priya Parker's book, The Art of Gathering. Fantastic book. Everything from online,
book, yeah.
Everything from events, offline events, and everything in between. So definitely recommend that, Catherine, if you haven't read it already. We had a question live, and I did a few more which happened before we started. Sure. But remember to keep putting your questions live. If you've got anything for Rich or anything which sparks something while you're listening in, please put your questions live as well. So a question here about, you know, if you've got a community and how can you kind of arrange things like accountability partners or teams, or I guess within a community. Miles, if you want to kind of add a bit more information to that, let us know, but I think it's more about how to put communities into like small teams or small groups and partners. Have you had any success in that? And have you got any tips for that, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, at least we might need some more detail on the question. So how do you divide communities into smaller groups? Let me take that back into a slightly different direction in terms of groups and online communities. 90% of you should not have subgroups within your community. I mean, you can have like subforums if you need it to better segment and divide activity, but I think 90% of the time when people launch a new group in their community, they often advise them against it, and then they do it and it doesn't take off, and then I don't like to say that I told you so, but some of these times, you know, I told them so. And the problem is it's very hard. I mean, launching a new group is like launching a new online community. And if your community doesn't have an overwhelming level of activity, so much activity that it needs groups, if you don't have a group of people that are saying, hey, we need a separate group just to talk about this, then you probably don't need a group. And groups go wrong when someone at the top down, usually at the executive level or the marketing team, says, hey, we need a group to talk about this specific thing. And there's no clear demand for it. A lot of people last year created a COVID or a pandemic group. No one participated in these groups. I mean, there are some exceptions, but generally no one participated in these groups. So most of the time, you don't need groups. That said, if you are launching groups, make sure that only you or a select group of members do have the chance to do it. And when you are launching those groups, make sure you have someone that's running the group that isn't you. And what I mean is if it's other members of the staff or the team that you work with, then make sure they are very aware of how much effort it takes, make sure there's a criteria in place and what the expectations are and what you're going to do if you don't hit those expectations. You're going to close that group down. I think that's quite important. And then if you do get a group up and running, make sure you have someone that is really invested in initiating activity and responding to members, engaging with other members. Make sure you have someone that's really in the weeds of doing that kind of work because you need it to happen. Going back to what Marley's saying, have you had a chance to run such as an accountability partner or accountability teams? I'm not quite sure how you're defining accountability teams or partners here. But yeah, if you want to elaborate, then we can go a little bit deeper into that. But generally, don't create a group unless there's an overwhelming demand to have that group. Most of the time, it's not a good idea. I think we lost Tom again, so let me just gather another question here. Brianna says, how much do you recommend consulting with the community itself to inform the positioning, lead versus follow? Yes, fantastic question. I think one of the most important things that is happening at the moment. There's a balance, right? If you do everything the community wants, you're going to fall victim to the engagement trap, where you have a lot of members that are very heavily engaged, but they might just be talking about the things that are of interest and are relevant to them at any particular time. And if you don't listen to your members, you have a ghost town where it's just asking members to do what you want, and that's probably not going to work out well instead. So what we try to do is really spend as much time with members as possible, get into the specifics. So a while ago, I was working with a community of sales professionals. And one of the things we found working with this community is that they didn't actually want a community just to ask questions and get help. What they really needed were templates and specific tools and documents that they could use. And we began by seeding those templates in the community, getting people to share their best templates, setting a standard for what would be expected, and then that community began to take off. So there's a balance of both. There isn't a specific answer, but I think maybe without meaning to be arrogant here, I think maybe part of the art of what I do is finding that balance. Because I can't think of a single rule. There's kind of an intuition about it. Another example, a few years ago, I was called in to work with a community of teachers. And one of the challenges with this community is they had a couple of consultants in the past who had done the research, and they'd found out that this community, what's happening again and again, was that teachers were saying they were too busy. Two of the consultants before me had said exactly the same thing. The teachers were too busy to participate in a community. And what they had decided to do was to make it easier to participate, to make sure that participating required less time, tried to change what they were doing so the registration process was quicker, asking the teachers in the community to click like instead of create their own information, and generally doing everything they could do to reduce the effort required. But that doesn't fundamentally change the motivation. And what I recommended and what I worked with them to do is that if teachers were saying they don't have time to participate, they're so busy marking coursework and all those kind of things, they're telling you exactly what they need, but you have to see it. And when we made this community for teachers to share their time-saving tips, then it begins to take off. And so very often the answer is staring right at you from the research, but you have to see it. And I don't know how to give any tips for doing that, other than to not ignore the data you're getting. I think some clients see a lot of data, they ignore it, and then they go with what they wanted to do anyway. This often happens again when you're creating groups, but you've got to see it. You've got to see, you've just got to see what that data is telling you. You have to have some intuition, and it helps to work with other organizations. It helps to have some background and experience here, but you've got to really see it. And if you're not sure, just spend more time interviewing your audience, really going in deep. So if they say they want useful information, what specific information do they need? Like specifically, what information do they need? Is it templates? Is it documentation? Is it answers to questions? And if it is one of those things, then what kind of templates do they need? In what format? If it's questions, what kind of questions do they want to ask? Is it like regular questions? Is it a niche or niche questions? Really going deep into the weeds until you figure out exactly what that is. So Brianna, I don't have an exact answer, but I hope something in that rambling monologue there helped. Tom, I don't know if you're still here, but if you are, feel free to add a question.
I am still here. I'm so sorry. Like you don't understand how much I tried to find good internet for today, and apparently
No, it's fine.
No, it's great advice. From what I heard of it, was great advice. I've got another question. I'm going to go to a few of the ones asked in advance, but please keep them coming live as well. We've, about 20 minutes left, so plenty of time to go through a few more. Something I don't think we've mentioned yet, Rich, is about platform. How important do you think a platform is in terms of community success? Any tips for choosing one and how to kind of arrange one?
Yeah, that's such a big topic. Tips for choosing a platform. I've gone through this process with so many people, a couple that were on this session here. There's an ideal way, the way that it should work, and then there's a way it actually does work. And how it should work is that you begin with a blank slate, you put together the needs of your stakeholders, your needs of your members, you figure out what makes the community unique, you get the strategy done, and then you start working on the community because you know exactly what all of the requirements are. You create the request for proposal, you solicit the responses from the vendors, and usually there's a set number of like 5 or 6 ones, or less since the announcement yesterday, I guess. But yeah, like 5 or 6 vendors are out there, and then you go through the due diligence and negotiation, and you pick one. That's how it should work. What usually happens is you begin with a biased response because the CEO might love Salesforce or hate Salesforce, or have a biased idea of what they want in the first place, and a lot of things are designed to match that. Very often people don't want to spend a couple of months working on the strategy first. They want to do the platform selection alongside that. And so the way it should work and the way it does work are very different. So a couple of things I would look for. One is the budget. One of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people make is that they go to a vendor and then they ask them, what should this cost? And they don't know, because you need to provide them with an accurate membership projection again. And again, one of the things I talk about in my book is how you do that, how you come up with an accurate membership projection of how many people are going to be participating. Because that's crucial, because if you get put onto a higher tier, more members than you actually get, you're still paying for like that tier, regardless of how many that you get. So it's always worth trying to be as conservative as possible. And every vendor will let you pay more if you want, but none will let you downgrade your package. So being conservative with those numbers, along with the use cases, is very important. Most platforms do at the enterprise level, because there's 2 levels here. There's the enterprise level where you're looking at 50 grand plus a year, and then there's usually like the up to 5 grand a year, that kind of level. We get Circle and Tribe and Hivebright and a few others here as well. So there's 2 different levels. So figure out very quickly which of those levels you're in. I think it's quite important. And then you're looking at things like the security, you're looking at the SSO, the integration. And I think we also spend far more time on the platform than we do on the implementation partner. But very often it's the implementation partner that makes a community look good. And I've had situations where we've gone through, gotten examples and testimonials and reviewed the options, and we picked one. And then even then, it's a challenging relationship. So the short answer is I would first put together what your use cases are, speak to the stakeholders, particularly those involved with security and the privacy side as well, and the integration. These kind of things hold up a platform at the enterprise level so much. A lot of other things you can configure and design however you like. And you can get lost in the minutiae of gamification and all those kind of things. But at the enterprise level, really focus on the integration, get a very specific list of requirements. So for example, almost every platform will say, hey, we integrate with the Salesforce CRM. What does that integration actually mean? That can mean many different things. So going into the weeds of that is quite important. Be very clear about what comes out of the box and what you have to custom develop. Some vendors that I won't name here will say, yeah, we can do anything, but what they don't tell you, Jack, you'll have to spend like 40 to 50 grand to develop those kind of things. So be aware of that. Make sure you have the accurate membership projection that's up and running. And then really go into the weeds and the minutiae of how it's going to work. Don't just assume that because someone says they can do it, they can do it. Look for examples, speak to those individuals, speak to other people in those platforms that aren't recommended by the vendor. So if you go to feverbee.com/communities, you can find a list of different online communities by what vendor they're on. Reach out to those folks, really get honest feedback on how the vendor is, what they don't like about it. So yeah, there is a method about how it should work, but it's so messy in practice. But I would just go into more detail than what you think, because the challenges always come from things that you could have predicted in advance. Very often, like you could have anticipated those things in advance if you went into enough depth. Yeah,
and I guess it also depends on the size of your community, right? If you're a big, massive organization with 50,000 likely to come in, you've got a big budget to spend. Whereas if you're somebody doing a hobby community, you haven't got that many options. You've got to go with the free option, or let's say Facebook, which it's not a great place to be hosting a community. That's great.
It's a challenging one. Yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you what. This is a good time to ask you about your book. I think next question, Rich, what is your book about? What's it going to be about? What can we learn from it? What should we expect?
Sure. So my book. Let me do a bit of background here. So one of the things I strongly believe in is that eventually the success of every single community that's out there today hangs upon the skills of the people that's running that community. And that's why, we see two communities on similar platforms with similar audiences. Some will be really highly engaged and active and engaged, and some won't be. And the difference isn't the technology, it's not the budget, it's how good the people running those communities are. And I think at the moment, we spend so much time on the technology, so much time on the strategy, and all these things are really important. But eventually, when it comes down to it, everything hangs upon the success of the person that is managing that community. So this book is about skills. It's about the skills that you need to manage that community. And if you search for Build Your Community on Amazon.com, it's coming out soon. So if you search for Build Your Community, what this book is going to be about is systematically, step by step, in every single thing you're doing, how you upgrade your skills to develop the best community you can. Because you can have huge improvements in every online community, not just by upgrading the platform, not just by having a new strategy, although that's great as well, but by upgrading the skills you have to manage that community. And I think everyone thinks that they're really good at it, but when we benchmark the skills and the responses and how we're engaging different audiences and the setup of communities, we often find there's so much room for improvement. And I think in almost every single field and sector imaginable, the top people have coaches in what they do, they learn and they read. And so I think this book is designed to be a guide to improve your community skills. There's no big theories about the future of communities. There's no big strategic things. It's very much about the day-to-day skills, the really minutiae stuff that you need to make your community as successful as it can be.
Have you got an example of what some of those skills are? Like, can you tell me about one of the two of those skills, and maybe a little bit about what they might entail?
Sure. Let me talk about a lady named Colleen Young. So Colleen Young took our training course in 2016, and she was managing the community for the Mayo Clinic. And before she came to that community, it was dead. I mean, it was completely dead. Hardly anyone was participating in it. They didn't have the budget to upgrade the platform, any of those kinds of things. And what she began doing was just using skills. What I mean, if you look at the way a lot of people initiate and respond to a discussion, the very core thing that you can do. If you look at those kind of things, people say, hey, this is the answer to the question. I hope it helps. And that's kind of it. And people think that's good enough because, it answers the question. That's good enough. If you look at how Colleen Young does at the Mayo Clinic, and you can look her up, you can look up the responses. If you search for her name and my site, you'll find a bunch of things that I've talked about concerning her. She'll say, hey, and she'll mention that person to begin with. So it's personalized to them. Then she'll be, hey, welcome to the community, because she's recognized it's their very first post in the community. Most people don't even do that. And then she'll say, yes, this is a good question. She'll reference the specifics of the question. And then she'll say, hey, I think this person might be able to give you the answer. So she's mentioned 4 different people there, or 6 different individuals there who might be able to give a response. And all those 6 people, now they feel quite valued and appreciated to participate in that community. And then she'll provide a link where you can find the information. And then she'll say, hey, give me an update on how this went. And what she's doing there is inviting someone to respond again. She's telling them, I want to hear how it went. Because knowing how it went, if the answer helped or not, it's going to help the next person as well. And it means that person is going to participate again. And none of this costs a penny. It doesn't cost a dime. They're just purely skills. Let me give you another example. Very often when we launch a community, we'll say, hey, welcome to this community. We're launching this community. We'd love to have you involved. And that's not really that powerful, is it? If you think about skills, I don't feel particularly like I want to engage in that community. It feels like the same message that goes out to everyone. Now compare that to a message saying, hey, I know it's been 6 weeks since we last spoke, but I just have something I have to tell you. We're about to launch a community where you can do X, Y, and Z. And I think you would be great for this community because you've done this, you've done this, you've done that. And I think there are specific questions here, this one and this one, where I'd love to get your experiences and advice. If you want to join, you can sign up here. Here's the link, and it'd be a pre-approved invitation link, so they don't have to be approved, any of those kind of things. And instantly, that person's going to be far more engaged. And now these are just 2 very small things, like really small, in the weeds, minutiae things. But Colleen Young turned the Mayo Clinic into a monster success just by doing these kinds of things. And now when you take these skills and you infuse them amongst everything that you do, in how you engage with the super users in your community, in the content that you create, in how persuasive you're trying to be, in the messages that you're trying to get across, all these things matter. And I think a lot of people managing communities now don't realize that learning how to cajole and persuade people to do these things matters. Learning how to sell a powerful, compelling vision of a community and why people should give up their spare time to help a brand for free matters. No one goes to their local supermarket and starts, volunteering to stack the shelves. But for some reason, in online communities, we go to these spaces and volunteer to do customer support for free. Yeah. And on one level, it's insane, but on another level, it's because these people, those of us that are doing it, we're being paid in something that we value more than money. But knowing how to pay people in this emotional sense that they matters. And so being able to do these things incredibly well is important. So what this book does is go step by step through all the specific things that you have to do, even in terms of the gamification side and how long a discussion should be, how to message someone, how to get them to join, how to create a compelling community vision, how to nurture your super users, how to design a unique culture and environment. All of these things are so critically important. And I honestly, I don't want to be critical of anyone, but I don't think we're anywhere near as good at doing this as we could be. And I think there's such a opportunity for all of us now to get so much better at doing that. And that's what this book is about. It's about community skills.
Brilliant. I'm definitely going to check it out. When is it officially out?
Yeah, so officially it's out tomorrow, but my publisher told me that it doesn't get stocked for a couple of weeks. So what I would say, go to Amazon.com and pre-order it, and hopefully we can send an email out after this to everyone that attended, and just send them the link. But officially it should be out tomorrow. So if you go to Amazon.com and pre-order, add to your wish list, that would be amazing. And that would be awesome for me, and I appreciate that.
Amazing. No, definitely will. And please, obviously you're one of the biggest names in the industry, let's say. I definitely want to make sure everybody decides to check out this book.
Thank you. I'm not sure I am, but I appreciate it.
I'll tell you what, one thing, almost as a counteract to what you just said, somebody asked something earlier, which is very interesting. They said, do you think there's a danger of community managers becoming less genuine and human in their relationship building? Because, it happens with almost everything. Right? The more you kind of break it down into systems or whatever, human it becomes. Do you think there's a risk of that, or do you think there's a way to overcome that, perhaps?
100%. I think there's a risk of it. I think it can become routine, and I think it's because very often people lose sight or don't have the passion for what they're trying to achieve. And I think part of it is just the way that we're measured and what we're told to do. So many people, when they're told to build a community, they're told to drive as much engagement as they possibly can, or told to answer as many questions as they can, or get the highest response rate, or the satisfaction rate, or something like that. But what they're so rarely told about is why these people matter and why it's important to make them feel amazing about what they do. And so it's really easy to lose sight. I think people managing community teams get very into the weeds of the functional side, and they forget that it's people dealing with other individuals. And so I think community managers often become customer support reps without realizing it. The only difference is they're doing it in a public place, and they don't end up building that genuine spirit of community. But that said, I think there's still skills involved with that. I mean, in almost any other field that we work in, you can learn skills and still deliver those skills with passion and enthusiasm and with caring. I think as long as people are always made aware that these people matter, that you care about this audience, that you want them to feel amazing, that matters. And I think the one thing you can't teach is to have the right attitude towards the work. If you don't have the right attitude towards your work, it's going to become a routine. You're probably not going to be in this space for that long. So you definitely need the right attitude towards your work. And that's just something you either have or you don't. Either you really care about making these people feel amazing and you get satisfaction and you joy from doing that, or you don't. And I found it very difficult to influence that. But you know, even when we recruit staff, we don't do it anywhere near as well. And just finding the right person just fantastic.
Yeah. Great. And I've heard it many times said that empathy is one of the key points of a community manager. And that is something which you can get better at being empathetic, listening more, maybe having some of these skills. But ultimately, empathy is the core thing, right? If you're not doing it as a human, you're not being a good community manager. So no, that's a great point.
There's one thing I would add to that. There's no shame if this isn't the right kind of work for you. And in fact, it's very possible to be at the director level of community where you're not dealing with members on the day-to-day level and do a fantastic job. But if you are doing work at the day-to-day level, engaging with members every single day, then you need to have that right attitude and the empathy. You have to really enjoy making people feel great about themselves at the micro level. Whereas at the more macro level, if you're running a community team or something, then getting satisfaction from seeing, the satisfaction ratings of the community or the level of engagement going up is fantastic. Yeah. I mean, for example, I don't personally manage a online community because I don't think I've got the energy it takes at this point. I think my energy is so distracted by client work and all those kind of things. So I think there's absolutely no shame if that day-to-day in the weeds level work isn't for you, but you've got to figure out what your solution to that is.
Definitely. All right, so we've got about 5 minutes. So I want to turn this into a bit of a quick fire 5 minutes. All right, if anybody's got any questions, last minute quick questions for Rich, put them in now. And we'll start that last 5 minutes off with Lily. She asked another great question. How do you determine the saturation point of your community? When do you decide enough is enough in terms of growth and things like that?
I don't think there's never enough growth. I think the saturation point is when you reach the point where you don't need maybe you're right, where you don't need more engagement. And this is quite natural. Usually there's only so many people that are interested in a topic, and once most of them are in the topic, then things shift. What is important when you reach that saturation point is that the way you promote the community changes, because most of the people joining that community, most of the people likely to join the community have already joined. And that means you can go into really difficult areas like different languages and attract that kind of audience, different territories, different age groups or whatever it is. You can try and attract those kind of audiences, but there's a law of diminishing returns there. But most of the new people at this point are going to be new to the topic. So that's when you need to be creating your newcomer guides. That's when you need to be focusing upon the definitive resources and helping people that are new with equipment lists and configuration settings or whatever's helped someone that is new. That's the point where you've got to really focus on that level.
Okay, great. Tuvi has also asked something. Which community would you say has the best best content, and in brackets strategy for their members?
I honestly have no idea. I'm not privy to all of the content strategies of communities out there. But if you go again to feverbee.com/communities, what you can find are a list of communities that I would probably rank as the best. It's not specific to the content side, but I think it's a list of communities that are the best. One that does stand out actually is projectmanagement.com. I recommend them a lot because if you look at the site, it doesn't look great, but if you look at the quality of the content and how many thousands of project managers are giving up their time to share their best content with their competitors, that's incredible. and looking at how they create the standards, and the idea that, and this goes back to the skills and the vision, the idea that to have a template that's accepted is a badge of honor. That's an incredibly valuable and incredibly powerful thing to have. So we can learn a lot from that. And again, that's a skill that they created. It didn't cost them any money. It's a skill that they created.
Brilliant. And this could be the last one, unless we have a real quick one afterwards. Briannon said, is shifting to an inclusive open community really a solution for a struggling exclusive member-only community? Any thoughts? You might want to read that for yourself. It's a bit of a mouthful. It's just there in the comments.
No. I mean, I could just say no, but actually, let me give a more specific answer. An exclusive community is where being exclusive is part of the story. And the story is you get to belong to an exclusive group. And if it isn't an exclusive group, if you're letting anybody join, then there's no point there, right? Like, that's not exclusive. All you're doing is losing all the search traffic. You're putting barriers that don't need to be in place, and it doesn't work. And when exclusivity doesn't work, it's because you're targeting an audience that doesn't feel that these are their peers. You may be not being exclusive enough, like letting in everyone that applies. I think that's quite common. It's often because you haven't told that story well, or the audience just doesn't care. So can you shift to an inclusive open community? Yes, but you probably need to relaunch the entire community and tell a different story. But really, if you're at this point, I would spend a lot of time researching the audience, going through that whole strategy process like we would do with the client at this point, and really figuring out what the positioning and the concept is, because this isn't a subtle shift. Another thing here is, you have an exclusive community that you open up, you've got to be careful that all of the content here that people thought was private and exclusive isn't now open to the public domain as well. So there's lots of other considerations around that, but I think you probably need a relaunch of the entire community, different concept, maybe a different platform. Yeah, there's a lot that's going on there.
Brilliant. That is time up, I'm afraid. Thank you so much for everyone listening in. Thank you so much, Rich. And I do apologize so much for the internet issues. I tried my hardest to get rid of them, but they prevailed anyway. So
it's absolutely fine. Thank you so much, everyone here, for listening. Thank you, Tom, for inviting me for this. And thank you so much. I appreciate all of your time and your questions as well.
Thank you. Thank you for doing what you do. Remember to get Rich's book. Building Communities, is it? Building Communities is the title?
Build Your Community.
Build Your Community. Build Your Community. Brilliant. Let's get that as soon as possible. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
I'll send out the link after this, and hopefully you can send it through.
Perfect. All right. Take care, everyone. That's a wrap, and I'll speak to you guys soon.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Bye.